Once upon a time, there was a sweet little girl who was loved by everyone who met her, but most of all, her grandmother, who adored her. She had a special cloak with a red hood that her grandmother made for her. It fit her so perfectly that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother called her to the kitchen, where she was preparing a basket of goodies. "Take this basket to your grandmother's house," she said. "She is ill and needs some food and medicine. Be careful on your way and don't stray from the path." Little Red Riding Hood eagerly accepted the task, feeling proud to help her grandmother. "I will be very careful, Mama," she promised, her voice full of confidence. Her mother warned her again, "Remember, stay on the path and do not talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood nodded and waved goodbye, excited to go. She set off down the winding forest path, the soft breeze of the woods carrying the scent of pine trees and flowers. The sun was shining brightly through the trees, and the birds sang cheerfully in the distance. She marveled at the beauty around her, the dappled light on the forest floor, the colorful flowers growing at the edge of the path, and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. As Little Red Riding Hood skipped along, her thoughts were only on the good deeds she was about to do. She could already picture her grandmother's warm smile when she arrived at the cottage. She didn't notice the dark shadows creeping in between the trees, nor the silent movement of the wind. She was too wrapped up in her own excitement. Suddenly, a rustling sound caught her attention. She turned and saw a wolf standing just off the path. He was tall and sleek, with dark fur and sharp eyes that glinted in the sunlight. The wolf looked at her with a sly smile, his ears twitching as if he were listening carefully to every sound. "Where are you going, little girl?" the wolf asked, his voice smooth and friendly. He sounded kind, but there was an underlying hint of something dark in his tone. Little Red Riding Hood hesitated for a moment, but then she remembered her mother's warning. She stood tall and replied, "I'm going to my grandmother's house to take her some food and medicine. She is sick, and I want to help her." The wolf's eyes gleamed, and he leaned in closer, his voice lowering. "How lovely of you, little one. And where does your grandmother live?" "She lives at the end of the path," Little Red Riding Hood said, pointing to the winding trail ahead of her. "It's a small cottage in the woods, just beyond the big oak tree." The wolf thought for a moment, his mind already working quickly. "What a lovely grandmother you have," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "But wouldn't it be a shame if you didn't stop to admire the flowers or take a look at the beautiful things in the forest? Your grandmother can wait a little longer." Little Red Riding Hood felt a moment of uncertainty, but she was a curious girl, and the forest was so full of life. The wolf's words seemed harmless, and she did enjoy looking at flowers. "Well, I suppose a short detour wouldn't hurt," she said. "I will pick some flowers for grandmother." The wolf gave a sly grin as she turned off the path. Little Red Riding Hood moved into the woods, her eyes focused on the vibrant colors of the flowers that surrounded her. She picked a bouquet of wildflowers, bending down to gather the most beautiful ones she could find. Meanwhile, the wolf took the opportunity to slip back onto the path and hurry toward the grandmother's cottage, his footsteps quick and silent. As Little Red Riding Hood continued her journey through the woods, her thoughts were filled with the beauty of the flowers she had gathered. The forest was a place of wonder for her, with its tall trees swaying gently in the breeze and the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. She was so absorbed in the task at hand, picking the most perfect flowers for her grandmother, that she didn't notice the time passing. She didn't hear the distant howl of the wind or the crack of branches underfoot as the wolf made his way swiftly toward the cottage. The wolf, meanwhile, was moving with purpose, his long legs stretching quickly over the forest floor. He was silent, blending into the shadows of the trees. His eyes were fixed on the cottage, and his mind was already planning his next move. He knew the old woman would be alone, and he was eager to take advantage of the opportunity. When he finally reached the cottage, the wolf stood for a moment, considering the scene before him. It was a small, quaint house with a thatched roof and flowers blooming around the windows. The smell of freshly baked bread and the faint scent of herbs floated in the air, making the wolf's mouth water. He had been anticipating this moment for some time, and now that he was here, he couldn't wait to carry out his plan. He padded up to the door, which was slightly ajar, and knocked gently. There was no response, so he knocked again, this time louder. Moments later, a weak voice from inside called out, "Who's there?" "Why, it's me, your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf said in a high-pitched, sweet voice, trying to mimic the tone of the girl he had met on the path. "Oh, how nice of you to visit, my dear," came the response from inside the house. The old woman was lying in bed, feeling weak and feverish, but the sound of her granddaughter's voice made her smile. She was so happy to know that the girl had safely made her way through the woods. The wolf grinned slyly to himself, knowing that his deception had worked. He waited a moment, then, in his deepest voice, said, "Grandmother, I have brought you some fresh food and warm blankets." "How thoughtful of you, my dear," said the grandmother, her voice soft with gratitude. "Please, come in." With that, the wolf pushed open the door and entered the small, dimly lit room. The old woman was lying in her bed, her thin frame hidden beneath a heavy quilt. The wolf could see that she was frail and ill, and a sense of satisfaction washed over him. This would be even easier than he had thought. "Come closer, my dear," the grandmother said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "I want to see you better." The wolf crept toward the bed, his heart pounding in his chest. His steps were slow and deliberate, each one bringing him closer to his prey. As he reached the edge of the bed, he paused for a moment, watching the grandmother, who seemed so trusting and unaware of the danger looming in the room. "Grandmother," the wolf said, trying to soften his voice, "you seem to be feeling unwell. I brought you a special surprise. Would you like to see it?" The old woman smiled faintly, her eyes half closed in fatigue. "I would love to, my dear," she murmured, though she could hardly keep her eyes open. "You are so kind." At this, the wolf's grin widened, and he swiftly moved to the bed. In one swift motion, he lunged toward the old woman, his sharp teeth bared, his claws reaching out to grab her. The grandmother gasped in shock, her frail body trembling with fear. She had no time to scream before the wolf struck, overpowering her with his strength. But just as the wolf was about to finish his grim task, there was a loud noise from outside, a sound of footsteps crunching through the path. The wolf froze for a moment, his ears pricking up as he heard the approach of someone on the path. It was Little Red Riding Hood, returning from the woods with her bouquet of flowers, completely unaware of the danger her grandmother was in. The wolf hesitated. If he didn't act quickly, the girl might arrive and ruin his plan. With a swift motion, he pulled the bed covers over the grandmother's body and hid her beneath the blankets. Then, with a final glance toward the door, he quickly darted into the shadows, concealing himself in the corner of the room, waiting for the girl to arrive. Little Red Riding Hood, unaware of the looming danger, skipped merrily along the path, clutching the bouquet of flowers she had picked for her grandmother. As she approached the cottage, Little Red Riding Hood felt a strange stillness in the air. The birds had stopped chirping, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed to have faded away. A cool breeze stirred the leaves, but there was no laughter in the air. For a moment, she hesitated, sensing that something was not quite right. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself that it was simply her imagination. "Grandmother, I'm here!" she called out cheerfully as she approached the door. She reached for the doorknob, but to her surprise, it opened easily under her touch. It was slightly ajar as though someone had already entered. Little Red Riding Hood felt a twinge of unease, but she dismissed it. Her grandmother was old and could have forgotten to shut the door properly. "Grandmother?" she called out again, stepping into the dimly lit cottage. The room was quiet, the only sound the creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She glanced around, her eyes falling on the bed where her grandmother usually rested. But what she saw made her stop dead in her tracks. The bed was oddly still. The quilt, usually neatly tucked in, was thrown messily over the top. The figure lying beneath the covers seemed larger and more imposing than usual. Little Red Riding Hood. S' heart raced as she noticed the peculiar shape of the lump beneath the blankets. It didn't look like her grandmother at all. "Grandmother?" she asked again, her voice trembling slightly. "Come closer, my dear," came a faint, raspy voice from beneath the covers. It sounded strange, different from the usual warm and welcoming tone of her grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood stepped cautiously forward, her eyes narrowing in confusion. There was something not right about the voice. It was too deep, too hoarse, and as she got closer, she saw something even stranger. Her grandmother's voice seemed to be coming from under the covers, but the figure she could make out looked oddly larger. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" Little Red Riding Hood exclaimed, her words spilling out without thinking. She had been taught to notice oddities, and now she couldn't ignore them any longer. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied, his voice still strained, though he tried to keep it soft and comforting. Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said, feeling an unsettling chill run down her spine. The eyes peeking out from beneath the quilt were unnaturally large, their pupils dilated in a way that seemed unnatural for a frail old woman. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the wolf said, his voice smoother now, but with an undertone of something darker, more menacing. Little Red Riding Hood felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach, but she couldn't bring herself to turn away. She was too close now to simply leave. As she stepped closer to the bed, she noticed something else, something that made her pulse quicken with fear. "Grandmother," she said, her voice trembling, "what big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with, my dear," the wolf snarled suddenly, leaping from the bed with terrifying speed. Little Red Riding Hood barely had time to react before the wolf was upon her. His claws reached out to grab her, his sharp teeth bared, ready to devour her. She screamed, the sound echoing in the small room, but it was too late. The wolf had already pounced. But just as he lunged, the door to the cottage burst open, and in rushed a woodcutter who had been passing by. Hearing the commotion, he had rushed to the cottage, suspecting that something was wrong. With a mighty swing of his axe, he struck at the wolf, knocking him back and causing the beast to yelp in pain. Little Red Riding Hood, in a daze, scrambled to her feet and backed away from the wolf. She was terrified, her heart racing as she watched the struggle between the wolf and the woodcutter unfold. The wolf, now badly wounded, tried to escape, but the woodcutter's strength was too much for him. With one final blow, the wolf fell to the ground, defeated. The woodcutter turned to Little Red Riding Hood, his face a mixture of concern and relief. "Are you all right, child?" he asked gently. Little Red Riding Hood, still in shock, nodded slowly. I think so," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize it was the wolf." The woodcutter smiled reassuringly. "It's all over now, little one. The wolf won't harm anyone again." He turned to the bed and, with a few quick motions, pulled back the covers to reveal the grandmother who had been hidden under the quilt. She was weak but unharmed, her eyes wide with relief. "Oh, thank you, kind woodcutter," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. Little Red Riding Hood ran to her grandmother's side, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Grandmother, you're safe," she cried, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "Thanks to this brave man," the grandmother replied, smiling at the woodcutter. The room was filled with a sense of calm after the chaos had passed. The woodcutter stood near the door, his axe in hand, breathing heavily from the struggle. Little Red Riding Hood, still in shock, clung to her grandmother, her small frame trembling with relief. The grandmother, now safe, stroked her granddaughter's hair gently, trying to soothe her fears. "My dear, you were so brave," the grandmother said softly, her voice warm and comforting. "But you must always remember your mother's warning. Never stray from the path and never speak to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood nodded solemnly, her mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. I didn't know it was the wolf. He tricked me." "That's the way of wolves," the woodcutter said, his voice firm. "They deceive and prey on the innocent, but you're safe now, and that's what matters." The grandmother gave a sigh of relief, grateful for the woodcutter's intervention. "Thank you, kind man, for saving us. I don't know what we would have done without you." The woodcutter nodded modestly, his face softening. "It was nothing. I was just passing by when I heard the commotion. You're both lucky I was close." Little Red Riding Hood looked up at him, her eyes still wide with gratitude. "You saved us," she said simply. "Thank you." The woodcutter smiled and gave a small bow. "It's my duty. Now, both of you need to rest. That's what's most important." With the immediate danger gone, the woodcutter left the cottage, giving one last look to Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother before he disappeared into the woods. The air was much quieter now, the forest returning to its peaceful state, and the sun slowly began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the landscape. Inside the cottage, the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood sat together by the fire. The old woman wrapped her arms around the girl, pulling her close. "I'm so glad you're safe, dear," she said, her voice tender. "But promise me you'll always be careful when you walk through the woods." "I promise, grandmother," Little Red Riding Hood whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never stray from the path again." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Little Red Riding Hood couldn't help but think about the strange events of the day. The wolf, his deception, and how close she had come to danger. She shuddered at the thought, but her grandmother's comforting presence made her feel safe again. As the night fell, they ate the food Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and the grandmother told stories of the past, of times when the forest had been a place of mystery and magic. The stories filled the cottage with warmth, laughter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for much too long. Before long, Little Red Riding Hood's eyes began to droop, her body tired from the long journey through the woods. Her grandmother tucked her into bed, pulling the warm blankets up around her shoulders. "Sleep well, my dear," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from Little Red Riding Hood's forehead. "I will, grandmother," the little girl replied softly, a smile on her lips as she closed her eyes. As she drifted off to sleep, Little Red Riding Hood made a vow to herself. She would always remember her mother's warnings and the lesson she had learned that day. No matter how beautiful the forest seemed, or how sweet the temptation to wander off the path, she would never again stray into danger. And from that day forward, Little Red Riding Hood stayed on the path whenever she visited her grandmother, never speaking to strangers and always being careful, knowing that some dangers were hidden behind the kindest faces. Once upon a time, there was a woodworker. One day, he decided to make new legs for his broken chair. He chose a nice log and, without hesitation, grabbed his sharp axe. "Oh dear, will it hurt?" squealed the piece of wood. The woodworker was so frightened that he quickly wanted to get rid of the strange log. He gave it as a gift to his friend Geppetto, who was a shoemaker. Geppetto gladly accepted the gift. He went back to his small workshop and sat down with his chisel. "I will carve a little man," he said to himself. "I will call him Pinocchio. I hope this name brings him lots of luck." First, he carved the hair, then the forehead and the little eyes, which blinked and stared back at him. Has the wood come to life? Wondered the shoemaker, and he began carving the nose. And immediately the nose started growing. No matter what Geppetto did to shorten it, the cheeky nose kept getting longer. Soon, the mouth was ready too. It even smiled and stuck out its tongue. Finally, Geppetto carved the arms and legs. Then the little man kicked him so hard that it knocked his wig off. "Ah, you're not even finished, and already you show disrespect to your father," he scolded him, placing him on the floor to teach him how to walk. As soon as Pinocchio stood on his feet, he ran across the room, opened the door, and dashed outside. Try to catch him. Poor Geppetto ran after him. "Catch him!" he shouted, but no one helped him. Passers-by stopped in surprise and wondered where this little wooden boy had come from. Fortunately, a policeman appeared from around the corner, grabbed Pinocchio by the nose, and handed him over to Geppetto. The shoemaker could hardly wait to pull the ears of the naughty one, but imagine how surprised he was when he realized he had forgotten to carve them. But Pinocchio got scared of the policeman and immediately asked his father for forgiveness. Of course, kind Geppetto was touched and forgave him. When they returned home, he made him a little suit from paper, shoes from bark, and a hat from bread. The little boy was very pleased and kissed the craftsman from the bottom of his heart. "Father Geppetto, I want to thank you for everything you've done for me," it said. "I will go to school to become a smart child and help you when you get old." "Oh, Pinocchio," sighed Geppetto. "We don't have money for textbooks." Then the little man sadly lowered his head. The shoemaker couldn't stand it and said to himself, "Whatever happens, happens." He put on his old velvet jacket and left the house. He returned without the jacket, but with a primer under his arm. "Where is your jacket, father?" Pinocchio asked. "I sold it. I was too hot with it anyway." Pinocchio understood what had happened, threw himself into his father's arms, and kissed him. The next day, he took the primer and went to school. On his way, he thought, "Today I will learn to read, tomorrow to write, and the day after to count. When I become smart, I will earn a lot of money and buy my father a brand new jacket." Suddenly, he heard a merry noise from somewhere. He looked around and immediately forgot about school. He ran to see what was happening and found himself in a square. In the middle of it stood a colorful round tent. "What is this?" Pinocchio wondered, and a little boy answered him. "Can't you read? This is a puppet theater." "And how much is the ticket?" asked Pinocchio. 4 pennies. "I am selling a primer for 4 pennies, Pinocchio shouted. Poor Geppetto. All his sacrifices, selling his velvet jacket, were in vain. Instead of going to school, Pinocchio sold the primer to buy a ticket for the theater. As soon as he entered the tent, the puppets immediately noticed him. "Pinocchio! Long live our brother Pinocchio!" they shouted from the stage. "Come up to us, Pinocchio!" called Harlequin. The guest jumped onto the stage and was embraced by his wooden relatives. But at that very moment, the theater director appeared, the terrifying Fire Eater. He whipped his long lash, and the poor puppets trembled in fear. Seeing Pinocchio with his bloodshot eyes, the Fire Eater hissed, "Hey you, get off the stage!" And then he added, "Tonight I'll deal with you!" After the performance, the director decided to cook lamb for dinner, but the firewood wasn't enough to start a fire. Then he remembered the wooden boy and shouted, "Pinocchio, come here so I can throw you in the hearth." "Spare me, master!" the boy cried. "I don't want to die! Oh, where are you, Father Geppetto? Where are you to save me?" "You have a father?" the director wondered, and his heart seemed to soften. "If that's the case, he will surely be very sad if you die. Perhaps I should burn Harlequin instead." Then Pinocchio knelt at his feet and shed heartfelt tears. "Have mercy on his life, master! Do not burn Harlequin! Better throw me in the fire!" "Look at him," the villain grinned. "This Pinocchio is a fine boy. Well, never mind. Today I'll eat undercooked lamb." And he asked the guest to tell him his story. After listening to the entire tale of the wooden boy, the Fire Eater thought for a moment. He felt a pang for the shoemaker Geppetto and handed the boy 5 golden coins. "Take them to your father and tell him to buy a new coat," he said. Pinocchio thanked him, hugged all the puppets one by one, and headed home. But on the way, he met the blind cat and the lame fox. They asked him where he was coming from, and Pinocchio shared his adventures. When they heard about the coins, the 2 tricksters concocted a devious plan. "If you really want to make your father happy, you'll need many more of these coins," they said. "But you know, there's a magical place where if you bury 5 gold coins, the next day you'll find 100 times 5. "How is that possible?" Pinocchio asked, astonished. "Very simple," replied the fox. "Have you heard of the Land of Fools? There lies the Field of Wonders. In it grows the great oak. If, at midnight, you dig a hole under the oak's crown and plant at least 5 coins, by morning a tree will grow, and instead of leaves, golden coins will hang from it." "Wonderful!" Pinocchio exclaimed, and filled with joy spun on one foot. Then he went with his new friends to the inn, called the Red Crab. They sat down to dine and discuss what to do. The fox and the cat ate their fill, but Pinocchio was so excited that he didn't even try the food. At midnight, the innkeeper woke him up and made him pay the bill. The cat and the fox, for some reason, had already left. The wooden boy parted with one of his 5 coins and set off alone toward the Field of Wonders. Suddenly, 2 figures emerged from the darkness, wearing black sacks over their heads. "Your money or your life!" they shouted. Of course, it was the cat and the fox. Pinocchio had nowhere else to hide the coins, so he stuffed them into his mouth. And since he dared not open it, he couldn't say a word. He remained silent even when the bandits tied a rope around his neck and tightened the noose. "Save me, father," he kept repeating to himself in his mind. The cat and the fox hung him from the great oak and said, "You'll hang here until you open your mouth, but know this, you don't have much time to think." Fortunately, the blue fairy lived nearby. As it grew light, she saw through her window the poor wooden boy, clapped her hands, and her servants, the falcon and the poodle, appeared before her. The fairy first turned to the falcon. "Fly to the great oak," she commanded, "and tear the rope with your beak." Then she turned to the poodle. "And you, take the carriage and bring the boy to me." Soon, the half-dead Pinocchio found himself in a warm and soft bed. The fairy summoned 3 famous doctors, the raven, the owl, and the cricket, who prescribed a very bitter medicine for the boy. As soon as he drank it, Pinocchio immediately recovered. "Tell me how you ended up in the hands of those bandits," said the blue fairy, gently stroking his head. And Pinocchio told her almost everything. Well, he conveniently left out the part about the premiere. And when the fairy asked him where his gold coins were, he answered that he had lost them, even though they were actually in his pocket. Suddenly, she started laughing. While they were talking, the wooden boy's nose, which was already quite long, grew by 2 more inches. "Oh, you," said the blue fairy, "why are you lying to me? Can't you see that your own nose is giving you away?" Poor Pinocchio didn't know where to hide from the shame. Then she clapped her hands and called upon a flock of woodpeckers, who pecked at his nose and shortened it. "You must always tell the truth," the fairy advised him, "because when you lie, your nose grows longer. Now go home and give the money to your father." Pinocchio thanked her, hugged her, and rushed to the workshop of his father, Geppetto. But as he passed by the great oak, he once again met… guess who? Yes, the cat and the fox. This time, the naive boy believed the cheats and buried his coins in the field of wonders. The next day, he went to see what had grown, but there was nothing. Even the coins had disappeared. So, Pinocchio went back home with empty hands. Geppetto scolded him for being gone so long, but in the end, he forgave him and sent him to school. One might think that after all the adventures Pinocchio had been through, he would have become wiser. But that very same day, he made friends with a lazy boy named Carlo. "Let's go to the land of fun," Carlo suggested. "There are no schools or primers there, and the children play all day long." Is there really such a wonderful place in the world? Pinocchio wondered. "I'm leaving tonight in a carriage," Carlo replied. "Do you want to come with me?" Of course. Pinocchio immediately forgot all about his father Geppetto. It turned out that Carlo wasn't lying. At midnight, a wonderful carriage appeared out of nowhere. It was pulled by 24 little donkeys, all wearing white boots. A grumpy coachman sat on the driver's seat, cracking a long, long whip. The carriage was full of boys who couldn't wait to reach the land of fun. There was no room left for Pinocchio, so he rode one of the donkeys. And the land of fun was exactly as Carlo had described. All the streets were filled with merrymaking, the boys played all day long, and the word school was forbidden. They weren't even allowed to whisper it. How wonderful life is, Pinocchio kept saying every time he met his friend. Just think, my teacher forbade me from being friends with you. But one morning, the wooden boy woke up and saw that instead of his little ears, which Geppetto had never finished carving, there were long, furry ears. What's more, the next day they were even longer and hairier. Pinocchio despaired. He put on his little cap and set off to find little Carlo. When they saw each other, the boys burst into laughter. Both of them had long ears. They laughed until they almost passed out. At one point, Carlo went silent, turned pale, and started swaying. "Help me!" he cried. "I can't stand on my feet." "I can't either," Pinocchio exclaimed, and he too began to wobble. In that moment, their faces turned into gray muzzles, and their bodies were covered with fur. They grew hooves and funny little tails. The boys were terrified and began to cry, but instead of their bright voices, a horrible donkey bray echoed. The grumpy coachman heard them and hurried over to see what was going on. "How wonderful," he said happily, rubbing his hands. "2 more wonderful little donkeys. Tomorrow I'll sell them for 4 gold coins." Carlo ended up in a rural stable while Pinocchio was taken to the circus. There they taught him to perform various funny tricks. Oh, those were hard times. Every day the trainer whipped him and fed him only straw. Once he was made to jump through a hoop, but unfortunately Pinocchio tripped and hurt his back leg. Then the circus owner called for the stableman. "I don't need a lame donkey," he said. "Take him to the market tomorrow and sell him." "But who would want to buy a lame donkey?" "I will," said a man, handing a few pennies to the stableman. "I need a donkey's skin for a drum." When Pinocchio heard what fate awaited him, he cried out sadly. But there was no one to save him. The buyer took him to the shore, tied his hoof with a string, hung a stone around his neck, and pushed him into the water. Then he sat down and waited for the little donkey to drown so he could pull it out, skin it, and make a drum from its hide. Weighed down by the heavy stone, Pinocchio sank all the way to the sea floor. There, he suddenly remembered all the sorrows he had caused his father Geppetto, and he became very sad. He decided to call for the help of the Blue Fairy. She heard him immediately and sent some kind fish to the sea, who ate the donkey meat, but left the wooden body of the boy untouched. And when the buyer pulled the string out of the water, instead of a dead donkey, there hung Pinocchio. The poor man was so scared that he started stuttering. "Where did the donkey go, the one I just pushed into the water?" he wondered. "I am that donkey," Pinocchio answered, laughing uncontrollably. "You?" the man shouted angrily. "You swindler! Don't be mad. Untie the string and I'll explain everything," Pinocchio pleaded. But the man was furious. Finally, the man agreed to listen to him, and the boy told him everything from beginning to end. When he finished his story, the buyer shouted, "Do you think I'm crazy? I don't believe a word you say. I paid money for you, and now I want it back. I'll take you back to the market and sell you for firewood." At that, Pinocchio stuck his tongue out, dove into the sea, and swam far away. Out of the waves, a massive blue whale suddenly leapt, chasing the wooden boy through the water with a powerful surge, its mouth wide open. Pinocchio got scared and desperately splashed with his hands and feet. He swam faster and faster, but the monster caught up to him, opened its giant mouth, and swallowed him whole. The poor boy slid into the whale's stomach so fast that he felt nauseous. When he finally stopped, everything around him was pitch black. "Help! Help me!" Pinocchio cried, crawling on all fours. Suddenly, a distant light flickered. Soon the flame of a thin candle was visible. A little more, and... no, it couldn't be. "Father Geppetto, is that you?" "Pinocchio, my son!" Crying with joy, they hugged each other and started telling their adventures. "I searched for you on land day and night and couldn't find you," Father Geppetto began. "Then I made a boat to continue searching for you at sea. But a terrible storm broke out. The waves capsized the boat, and I was swallowed by a massive whale. Luckily, that same day, it had eaten the remains of a sunken ship. In its hold, there was plenty of food, and that's how I didn't die from hunger." "I'm so happy to see you again, Father Geppetto," said Pinocchio. "Now we must escape from here as soon as possible." They held hands and started climbing towards the throat. Luckily, the monster was sleeping with its mouth open, as it had asthma. So, Pinocchio managed to crawl out and swam with all his might, while Father Geppetto sat on his back. When they reached the shore, the old man shivered from the cold. "Lean on my hand, Father," said Pinocchio, and led him along the deserted shore. Soon they saw an abandoned hut and went inside to warm up. The boy noticed that the shoemaker had a fever, and he prepared a comfortable bed of straw for him. "I'll go find some milk to feed you," he said. It turned out that this was not an easy task. Pinocchio had to walk alone for several fields before reaching a village. There, he heard the mooing of cows and asked the farmer for some milk. "I'll give it to you. Why wouldn't I?" replied the farmer. "But how will you pay me back? My donkey died yesterday, and I don't have money to buy a new one. If you're willing to do its work, I'll give you milk and bread every morning." Pinocchio agreed, and for several days, he worked from dawn to dusk, carrying food to his sick father, Geppetto. Then he started making baskets. From time to time, he went to the market to sell them and spent his money wisely. In the evening, he would study to read and write. One day, Pinocchio overheard that the Blue Fairy was seriously ill. Without thinking twice, he sent her all the money he had saved up until then. That evening, he dreamt that she came to reward him for his kind heart. And the next day, he looked in the mirror and couldn't believe his eyes. There, in the reflection, was a beautiful boy made of flesh and blood. Father Geppetto was deeply moved and hugged him tightly. And where was the previous Pinocchio? "There he is," said the old shoemaker, pointing to the wooden puppet sitting on the chair. "How wonderful it is that I'm now a real boy," said the living Pinocchio, and out of joy he spun around on one foot.
Once upon a time, in a cozy little house nestled at the edge of a vast and enchanting forest, lived a loving mother goat and her 7 playful kids. Their home was warm and inviting, with wooden beams supporting the thatched roof, and the scent of fresh hay and wildflowers always lingering in the air. Mother Goat, like all mothers, loved her little goats very much. She protected them from all the wild animals in the forest. The mother goat was gentle, yet wise, with soft white fur and kind watchful eyes that shone with love for her little ones. The kids, full of energy and mischief, frolicked around the house, their tiny hooves clicking against the wooden floor as they played. One bright morning, the mother goat gathered her children around her before leaving for the forest to gather food. Her voice, always calm and soothing, became firm as she warned them. "Dear children, I must go to the forest. Be very careful while I am away. The wicked wolf is always lurking nearby. If he comes, do not open the door under any circumstances. He may try to trick you, but you will recognize him by his rough voice and his black paws." The little goats, despite their playful nature, were obedient and promised to be cautious. She kissed them one by one, her nose brushing against their soft fur, before stepping out into the morning light. The sun cast golden rays through the tall trees, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves as she made her way into the forest, unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. Not long after, a shadow moved between the trees. The wolf, A fearsome creature with a thick matted coat of grey fur and piercing yellow eyes had been watching the house from a distance. His long, sharp claws dug into the earth as he prowled closer, his mind scheming how to deceive the little goats. Then, licking his lips hungrily, he knocked on the door with his heavy paw. "Open up, dear children. Your mother has returned and brought something for each of you," he called in his deep, growling voice. The little goats instantly knew it was not their mother. "No, no, you are not our mother. She has a soft, gentle voice, but yours is rough and deep. You are the wicked wolf," they cried, pressing against each other in fear. The wolf growled in frustration and stormed off to a nearby shop. There, he bought a large piece of chalk and swallowed it, hoping to soften his voice. Then he returned to the house, his stomach churning, and knocked again. "Open the door, dear children. Your mother has returned and bring gifts for each of you." This time his voice was higher and smoother. But as he rested his paw on the windowsill, the little goats saw his dark, menacing claws. "No, our mother has white feet, but yours are grey. You are the wicked wolf," they shouted. Now seething with rage, the wolf ran to the baker and snarled, "Smear my paws with dough so they become white." The baker, frightened by the glint of the wolf's sharp teeth, hesitated, but at last obeyed, with his paws covered in dough. The wolf then hurried to the miller. "Sprinkle white flour over my paws so they look just like a goat's," he ordered. The miller, trembling with fear, quickly dusted the wolf's paws until they were as pale as snow. Satisfied with his disguise, the wolf returned to the house and knocked a third time. His voice was gentle, and when the little goats peeked through the crack in the door, they saw white paws. "Open the door, dear children. Your mother has returned from the forest with gifts for you." Their doubt wavered, and believing it to be their mother, they unlatched the door. In a flash, the door burst open with a deafening crash. The wolf lunged inside, his golden eyes gleaming with triumph as his lips curled into a wicked grin. A terrible growl filled the house, sending the terrified kids scattering in all directions. One dove under the table, another crawled beneath the bed, a third squeezed into the oven, one hid in the kitchen cupboard, another crept under the wash basin, yet another climbed inside a large chest, and the smallest, trembling with fear, slipped inside the tall grandfather clock. The wolf sniffed the air, his keen nose leading him to each trembling little goat. One by one, he swallowed them whole, his stomach stretching grotesquely with each gulp. Only the smallest kid, hidden deep inside the clock, remained safe. With a belly full and a satisfied grunt, the wolf staggered out of the house and collapsed beneath an old oak tree in the meadow, where he soon fell into a deep, snoring sleep. When the mother goat returned, her heart sank at the sight of the broken door, the overturned furniture, and the eerie silence that filled the once lively home. Frantic, she called out for her children. Her voice, filled with sorrow and fear, echoed through the empty rooms. At last, a faint quivering voice answered from inside the grandfather clock. The smallest kid crawled out, his eyes filled with tears, and sobbed as he told his mother what had happened. "I was so scared, Mama," the little kid whimpered, clinging to her. "When you left, we locked the door just like you told us. But then, we heard a knock, and a voice said, 'Open up, my dear children. Your mother is back.' At first, we didn't believe it. His voice was deep and strange, not like yours at all." He sniffled and wiped his nose on her apron. But then he came back with a softer voice and showed us his white paw through the window. "It looked like yours. We thought it was really you, Mama." So we opened the door. His little hooves trembled as he continued. "It was the wolf. He rushed in and scared us. We tried to run and hide, but he was too fast. He swallowed everyone, one by one. I crawled into the clock just in time and didn't make a sound. I heard everything, Mama. And then it was so quiet, determined to save her children. The mother goat followed the wolf's heavy snores until she found him stretched beneath the oak tree, his belly round and shifting slightly. She placed her ear close and heard faint movements within. Hope surged in her heart. With steady hands, she took a pair of sharp scissors and carefully cut open his stomach. To her immense relief, one by one, the little goats tumbled out, shaken but unharmed. They clung to their mother, their eyes wide with astonishment and joy. The mother goat, her heart burning with righteous anger, gathered heavy stones and filled the wolf's belly with them before sewing him back up. As the sun began to set, the wolf stirred, groaning. He felt an unbearable thirst and heaved himself to his feet, the weight in his belly making him sluggish. He staggered toward the river, lapping up water greedily. But as he leaned over the edge, the heavy stones pulled him forward. With a loud splash, he plunged into the deep water, never to be seen again. The little goats cheered, their voices ringing like bells in the twilight air. Their mother gathered them into a warm embrace, pressing them close, grateful that they were safe once more. From that day on, they never forgot the importance of caution and the wisdom of their mother's words. And so, in their cozy little house at the forest's edge, the mother goat and her 7 kids lived happily and safely ever after.